What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's Friday, you know what time it is. It's time to go over the wide receiver start and sits as we're heading into week 11. With the fantasy playoffs just a few weeks away, it's vitally important we are making the correct start and sit decisions every opportunity we get. As per usual, we will be going matchup by matchup, letting you know about each player's floor and ceiling and the area in which we have them ranked. But if you do have two players valued very similarly, we would definitely suggest going to our website, taking a look at the rankings, and using those to help you with your start and sit decisions. Members of our website not only gain access to the rankings, you'll have access to all of our waiver information, the trade model, sports betting picks, DFS picks, and more. So if that interests you, once again, that's at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that being said, though, let's go over to the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which running back currently leads the league with 13 carries inside the 5. The correct answer was actually Ezekiel Elliott. Congratulations to Jace, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, since this is a wide receiver video, which wide receiver currently leads the league in yards per target? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. There are plenty of matchups to get into, so we'll hop right into the first one. Tennessee on the road against Baltimore. Baltimore at this one, they are playing at home. They are nearly a touchdown favorite, coming in at 6.5 points. This would, by most accounts, indicate to us this is going to be a more run-heavy game script. I don't think that's playing a major factor in the reason why we have Marquise Brown ranked outside of the top 36, though. The major factor contributing into that ranking for Marquise Brown, it's going to be the success that they've had as of late, or lack thereof. The Tennessee Titans, they currently give up the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver position, despite not allowing a touchdown in either of the past two games to a wideout. The 6 prior weeks to that, they allowed at least one or more to the position. Despite this being one of the better matchups we could ask for as a Marquise Brown owner, his targets, they've been pretty inconsistent as of late. He hasn't eclipsed 3 receptions since week 6, nor has posted double-digit fantasy points since week 5. So like I said, he is ranked outside the top 36 for us, making him a more boom-bust flex play, one with a bit of upside due to the soft matchup, but yes, he definitely dropped in the rankings. As for Tennessee, AJ Brown is questionable but likely to play. He's also caught a touchdown in 5 of the last 6 contests, so even though Baltimore, they don't really give it up to the wide receiver position, have allowed just one multi-TD game in 2020, AJ Brown, he still has the chops to be ranked as a wide receiver too. His floor is going to be relatively low, similar to what we saw last week, because they are facing a very strong defense, similarly to Indianapolis. A stat line of 1 for 21, while unlikely, it's definitely in his range of outcomes. It is possible that Corey Davis does have a safer floor this week. It seems that when the volume is coming through this passing offense, a lot of it does go through Corey Davis. In Baltimore, while they haven't been giving up a lot of big plays, many touchdowns, they have been giving up receptions and volume to the wide receiver position. With that being said, though, the ceiling, it is going to be capped with Corey Davis, so start him as nothing more than a flex play, because this Baltimore matchup is typically one we're trying to avoid. The next matchup we have is Detroit on the road against Carolina. This is a game that has a 49-point projected total. Big news in this one, though, Matthew Stafford, he did sprain his thumb against Washington last week. It's unknown at this point if this will play any sort of factor into the total amount of passing volume on the Detroit side of the ball. In all fairness, Matthew Stafford is one of the toughest quarterbacks out there. I'm not worried about him potentially missing this game, but if it comes down to it, in some of the passes are opted for shorter routes, maybe to the running back position, or all around just translated into running game production, that does have the potential to lower the floor of the wide receivers in this matchup. Speaking of those wide receivers, the top 3 for Detroit, they are all listed as questionable. Kenny Golladay, as we know, has missed the past 2 games. There is a chance that he plays this week, and even if he is limited, we already know limited volume, limited snaps for Kenny Golladay can still result in a positive start. We don't have him listed in the rankings as being available on Sunday, which does leave Marvin Jones in a position where he should see more volume. Danny Amendola, he did not practice this week, less likely to play than that of Jones, and while typically having potentially both of these receivers out this week would raise the floor of Marvin Jones significantly, and and the combination of him scoring a touchdown in each of the past 2 games would typically line up to be a great start. We do know the Carolina Panthers passing defense towards wide receivers. They have played pretty solid throughout the season, not so much as of late, but the combination of a hobbled Marvin Jones, defenses being able to focus on him that much more without the competition around him, and the injury to Matthew Stafford's thumb, it just combines to lower his floor to what we typically expect. For that, once again, Marvin Jones a boom bust flex play, but to his credit, he definitely has been producing each of the past 2 weeks with Kenny Golladay out. On the other side of the ball for Carolina, all 3 receivers, they are in play this week. Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, their floors and ceiling are definitely the highest out of the 3. Slight edge to Robbie Anderson. Both receivers should be started with the expectation of producing as back-end wide receiver 2s with upside, and Curtis Samuel, more of a wide receiver 3. The next matchup we have Pittsburgh on the road against Jacksonville. Pittsburgh are heavy road favorites in this one. We're talking double-digit points here. 10-point favorites, even though they're on the road, but the receivers on the Pittsburgh side, they are just too hot to sit. Against Cincinnati just a week ago, each of these receivers, we're talking Chase Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster, as well as Deontay Johnson, received 10 plus targets, and each one of them scored a touchdown. Against this very beatable Jacksonville pass defense, each one of these receivers are going to be ranked as wide receiver 2s. We would give the edge to Deontay and Chase Claypool being more high-end 2s, Juju Smith-Schuster being that more mid-range 2. The only thing really going to hinder them is potentially this game being more of a blowout, more volume in the run game, because as we know, Jacksonville, they may be weak when it comes to pass defense, but they are equally week when it comes to defending opposing running backs. With Pittsburgh being 10-point favorites, they may have the opportunity to rely more on the run game, and if it's successful, that could be at the detriment of the volume in the pass game. On the other side of the ball for Jacksonville, we're still expecting the backup quarterback to play. When it comes to sheer passing, that means DJ Chark is really the only receiver we can trust. Pittsburgh, they have been giving it up to the wide receiver position, so DJ Chark is a solid start. We just have to understand with the backup QB, his floor may be relatively low. He still is ranked within our top 30, but his range of outcomes in this matchup, they're going to be pretty wide. The next matchup we have is the New England Patriots on the road against the Houston Texans. Surprisingly, this one has a pretty hefty total of 48 points. For New England, pretty simple. Jacoby Myers is actually a player we can trust. His targets in the last 3 games, he had 10 in week 8, 14 in week 9, and followed that up with even 7 against Baltimore. We know Baltimore is a very stingy pass defense, so to post 5 receptions for 59 yards, that does show us exactly how high his floor is. And with the Texans ranking inside the top 10 and allowing fantasy points to wide receivers, Jacoby Myers is a top 30 option this week. As for Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, both players we can start safely each and every week. Cooks being that back end 2, high end 3 option with a bit more variance. But Will Fuller, of course, we know he is a solid mid-grade too. Moving into the next one, we have the Philadelphia Eagles on the road against the Cleveland Browns. When it comes to Philadelphia, while many weeks ago they really didn't have any receivers, now it seems there are a lot more names thrown into the hat that really cloud up our judgment on what we should expect from this team. Travis Fulgham, Jalen Reagor, and Alshon Jeffrey, each one of those players is expected to play. We do have Jalen Reagor ranked the highest. This is a soft passing matchup, and from what we've seen, Reagor's involvement, Reagor's volume, it has been trending upward. And while Travis Fulgham, he has been the most productive receiver in this offense, especially for the past several weeks, his passing volume has been trending the other direction. Jalen Reagor, we have him ranked as a wide receiver 3, a back end 1, just inside the top 36. Travis Fulgham, he's more of a flex, and as for Alshon Jeffrey, who received 1 target a week ago, we would not consider starting him even in this plus matchup. On the other side of the ball for Cleveland, Jarvis Landry, Rashard Higgins, they can be started. The Philadelphia Eagles still have that illusion of being an extremely susceptible pass defense, and while that is somewhat true, they've actually only allowed a receiving touchdown to a wide receiver in just 3 games this year. If the weather does end up playing a factor and Nick Chubb being back back healthy with a hefty workload, I could see the volume in the passing game and the floor for each of these receivers being somewhat low. For that, we wouldn't trust either of them as anything more than a flex, but Jarvis Landry by far we believe to be the better start. The next game we have Atlanta on the road against the New Orleans Saints. This game has a 50.5 projected total. Big news in this one, of course, is that Drew Brees has been ruled out. Jameis Winston will be the starter against a very beatable Atlanta Falcons defense. Michael Thomas, though, still a bit too hard to trust as a high-end wide receiver one option. Even in this plus matchup, we know that he hasn't been playing the snaps we typically have seen, which is to be expected coming back from an injury, one that he already re-aggravated, and with this team having playoff aspirations, no need to really rush him back full force. We do still have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver one though. Jameis Winston definitely has the tools to produce as a fantasy quarterback for the pieces around him. That does mean the next wide receiver up, that being Emmanuel Sanders, I can see him also being in play as a flex. Wouldn't really venture too out further than that though. This is, of course, Jameis Winston's first start, so the risk it's going to be higher than usual. For the Falcons, though, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, both wide receiver ones in this matchup. They're playing in a dome against a familiar foe. This game has a 50.5 projected total. They're projected to be playing from behind. All positive signs for this Atlanta Falcons passing offense. Jones graded as more of a mid-grade wide receiver one. Calvin Ridley, he's a bit banged up, more of a back-end one, high-end two. The next matchup we have, Cincinnati on the road against Washington. This game does have a modest total, just 46.5 points, and while Cincinnati, they are coming into this matchup with Joe Burrow leading the team, second in the league amongst all quarterbacks in pass attempts, fourth in completions, so the passing volume, we really couldn't ask for much more. Washington football team though, they have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to the position, so each wide receiver we've come accustomed to trusting, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, their floor, it may be a bit lower in this matchup. Fear not though, we still have Boyd ranked as a back-end wide receiver 2, Higgins as a high-end wide receiver 3, but compared to the production we've normally been getting from them, that is of course somewhat of a downgrade. As for Washington, Scary Terry, the only receiver we're trusting in this matchup. He has an extremely high ceiling this week. As you know, if you're an owner of Terry McLaurin, he's been on a complete tear. I don't also have to remind you that Cincinnati allows top 10 numbers when it comes to fantasy points at the wide receiver position, and over the past 2 weeks have allowed 6 receiving touchdowns to wideouts. Up next, the Miami Dolphins on the road against the Denver Broncos. The Broncos will be 3.5 point favorites in this matchup. So for Miami, Devontae Parker makes a really intriguing start. There is no Preston Williams, of course. He is still on IR. Devontae Parker has had 7 targets in each of the past 2 games, and against Denver, 7 targets could possibly get it done. There's no perfect way to estimate exactly how much volume he will receive in this matchup, but what we do know is that Denver has allowed 5 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers over the past 2 weeks, so we should be able to consider Parker in this matchup a high-end wide receiver 3, but a high variance one at that. For Denver, Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy are also in play this week with the buys, with the injuries. These 2 players we definitely see as viable starters, ones we would prefer to recommend you start in your flex, especially Tim Patrick, because Jerry Jeudy has had 32 total targets over his past 3 games. Looking back into Tim Patrick's past 3 games, his volume much lower at 19 total. The next matchup we have the New York Jets. They are on the road against the LA Chargers, and starting with the Jets, we have 2 options in play. Rashad Perriman, of course, coming off of the phenomenal game. I definitely don't want to undersell his performance. We're talking 5 receptions, 101 yards, and a pair of touchdowns. That was, of course, against New England before their bye in week 10. We're talking week 9 here. So he is a couple weeks removed from that. But if you are trying to roll the dice, try to catch lightning in a bottle in back-to-back matchups for him, I can definitely see that as a high variance strategy that could end up paying out. The safer receiver, of course, in this matchup is going to be Crowder. Crowder we do have ranked right about the wide receiver 30, so while not a premier start, he has proven, of course, to be a high floor option in every matchup he started in, and right now getting a dud at any position in your starting lineup is something that could really hurt with the playoffs looming. As for the Chargers, while they are coming into this matchup as one of the heaviest favorites of the week, they're playing from home, you may be worried about the floor of the receivers in this offense, especially ones we're starting Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. I don't personally believe this should be a major factor. Every game that the New York Jets go into, they're typically the underdog and by a significant amount, and they're still top 10 in the league at allowing fantasy points to the position. With the ambiguity of the run game and who gets the touches for the Chargers, I definitely see this as a high floor game for the weapons in this passing offense. So Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, they're in play as starts this week. Keenan Allen, a mid-grade wide receiver 1, Mike Williams, back-end wide receiver 3. Moving into the next matchup, we have Green Bay against Indianapolis. This one is super simple because the wide receivers in this game, the range of outcomes for them, we've really been seeing the same story all season. When it comes to Davante Adams, he's a high-end wide receiver 1 option. You don't need me to tell you that. The only question you could have is of Marquez Valdes-Scantling coming off of 2 very strong performances. When it comes to a player who's been playing as inconsistent as MVS has, not only through this season but through his career, I'm not putting my chips on him to produce, especially in this difficult matchup. So for me, I'd prefer to leave him on the bench, making Davante Adams the only Green Bay receiver worth starting for me. For Indianapolis, it's also pretty simple. We really can't trust anyone. Possibly we could trust Michael Pittman. Yes, he's coming off of a good game. His production and volume has been trending up since returning from injury, but Green Bay, they're no slouch on defense, especially in stopping the passing game. So banking on a player who's been trending up but not really showing a high ceiling, at least not consistently outside of last game, it's not really the player I would put all of my chips in outside of a flex start. But we do have to understand the floor in this matchup for Pittman could be a bit lower than what we expect. The next matchup, we have Dallas Cowboys against Minnesota. Each of these passing defense has really been weak against opposing wide receivers. This means the upside potentially for each receiver in this game could be higher than what we normally would see. The projected total is 48.5 points. Dallas is coming into this game as a 1 touchdown underdog. The only issue, of course, for these Dallas receivers is that it's been impossible to predict the volume and production for each of these receivers. The range of outcomes for each of them is pretty wide. Gallup definitely trailing behind the other 2, that being CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. Cooper we would trust in this one due to the soft matchup as a back end 2. CeeDee Lamb, the less consistent of the 2 receivers, more of a flex play even in a soft matchup. On the other side of the ball, despite Minnesota being a heavy home favorite, meaning a better game for Dalvin Cook, we know Dalvin Cook, he's going to feast either way, but we are really excited about the potential upside for Jefferson as well as Thielen. Both receivers in this matchup are ranked as wide receiver 1s. Jefferson, more of a back end 1, high end 2 due to his variance. Adam Thielen, more of that mid-grade 1, but both players with an extremely high ceiling this week. Moving into the Sunday night matchup, we have the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Las Vegas Raiders. This one's pretty simple. Starting with the Kansas City Chiefs, Tyreek Hill, he's an auto start each and every week. One thing to keep in mind though is that Mecole Hardman has already been ruled out, but while you may think that may bring Demarcus Robinson in as a better start this week, keep in mind Sammy Watkins is returning, who could soak up some of that volume that is going to be left behind by Hardman. Be careful not to fall into a trap though of over trusting Sammy Watkins on his first game back. We already know that between Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, those 2 players alone are more than capable of soaking up the production. So when it comes to Sammy Watkins, start him at your own risk. On the Las Vegas side of the ball, I'm really not trusting anybody outside of Ruggs. Ruggs would need to break away for a big one, which isn't impossible with the Raiders playing from behind likely for this entire game. But the Kansas City Chiefs have only allowed 1 receiving touchdown to a wide receiver in the past 3 contests. The final game we have, the Monday night game, is going to be a good one. We have the LA Rams versus Tampa Bay. This one, I believe, out of almost every game this week, is one of the most difficult to predict because both of these teams have been playing somewhat inconsistently in their strengths and weaknesses over several of the recent games. What we do know though is that the LA Rams have quietly increased in their success against defending opposing fantasy receivers. In fact, they now allow the least fantasy points to that position, so clearly we do have to downgrade all of the receivers, Evans, Godwin, and AB. So Tom Brady, despite playing very well lately outside of that one game of course, in this matchup we have Godwin as a back end 2, Mike Evans as a mid-grade 3, and Antonio Brown as a back end 3 or flex. For the Rams though, although Josh Reynolds has been the most productive relative, we still have to rank him the lowest, somebody we would only trust as a flex in a desperate situation, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're no slouch in the passing game defense department either. In the floor for Kupp and Woods, while typically much higher in other matchups, it is going to have a slight downgrade. For that, Woods we would like to trust as more of a wide receiver 3 as opposed to his typical wide receiver 2, and Cooper Kupp, we're still comfortable with ranking him as a wide receiver 2, just one with a wider range of outcomes. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.